Alright, as we continue to jump around these 2024 movies, let's talk about these three, and let's start with Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire. I'm assuming we're working on that X being an and, I guess, so that's, as far as this movie in general goes, much like Godzilla vs. Kong before it, it kind of came out like much sooner than I was expecting. Like I almost kind of I like these movies quite a bit, but I also keep forgetting that this franchise is like really moving forward. So both of those movies kind of snuck up on me. But the fun thing about that was that I was basically able to go into this one completely and totally blind to anything. And because well, always I avoid trailers anyway, but I didn't even know what this one was about. I didn't even know like what direction they were going. I had no idea what the New Empire was referring to. I had no idea if it was going to be more of a Godzilla movie or a Kong movie, or if it was going to be equal. And I started to get kind of hyped, like at the last minute there. Like I rewatched all of the movies, and in this particular universe, I watched Monarch, which I hadn't done yet, and yeah, so going into it, I was like really ready for this thing quite suddenly, and it's fine. There is like a certain quality of these movies I've found. I still think the peak of this whole franchise was Kong Skull Island, which is a movie I've seen I don't know how many times now, and I feel like I still love it even more the more I see it. And these others are just like, good by comparison. So, while I think Skull Island is like the standard for what these movies could be, they've still been consistently, entertaining in their way, and the effects are really great, and the way they're kind of expanding on its world and stuff like that. All of that is coming together pretty nicely. As far as going into this one not knowing anything at all, the expectations were kind of heightened a little bit for this opening, or after this opening, when it begins with both Godzilla and Kong getting kills, like as we open the movie, and you get the vibe that I was getting this vibe like, oh man, this one's gonna be like slimier and more like. And it's something maybe not as extreme as like some of it got in Skull Island, but we'd kind of get to that point of there's an almost sort of PG-13 level gruesome quality that this could reach, but in this really sort of fun way, like in this sort of old-fashioned way. But that's kind of doesn't really we don't really see much of that after the opening scene. And then it goes for a while into what I know is everybody's favorite part of this franchise, the human characters. But when you look at, we have Rebecca Hall and her daughter from Godzilla vs. Kong, and they're kind of, I guess you could say they're the main characters, but it also kind of feels like they're trying to do a bit of an ensemble piece, because we've also got Brian Tyree Henry's character coming back, and we've got a new character that's Dan Stevens, who's like this sort of, they even reference it. It's clear they were going for like the Ace Ventura vibe, but he's like a kaiju doctor, I guess, which is a really interesting concept. But he's also Rebecca Hall's like college boyfriend, and so they have that whole relationship going on. He feels like a character. If Dan Stevens hadn't already made The Guest with Adam Wingard, I would have thought. I feel like Sharlto Copley was supposed to play this character, and they couldn't get him. He was busy doing like Boy Kills World or something, or Monkey Man. But no, it's Dan Stevens is a really welcome presence here, especially since he's got an established relationship with the director, because The Guest is amazing. But and Brian Tyree Henry comes back, and he's doing the comic relief thing that he was doing in Godzilla vs. Kong, which was fine, but it's these blockbusters have really leaned into the comedy lately, so that's just kind of this path that Hollywood is going to force you down when you do a big budget, extravaganza movie like this, I guess. Though stuff like him being harassed by a troll that goes by Ghidorah Stan 64 is kind of funny. The 64 being the reference to when we first saw, yeah. So stuff like that, where it's like they're throwing in those things that are like these really obvious references, and it's like I get why they're there, but they don't they're easy. They're kind of cheap. But it's nice that they're kind of showing, like, we respect the people that know how far these monsters go back and where they originally came from and stuff like that. So it's fun. It's endearing in its own way. So and it is fun to have the Brian Tyree Henry character come back also, because now that we're going to be bringing more people into Hollow Earth and we're going to be exploring that territory more, it is like, who's the person that would be the most excited about being able to go down into Hollow Earth? And it's like, yeah, it would be. So I didn't really mind too much. I also think he's just got a likability in general to where if it was another actor, this character might be, more annoying. And more of like the blatant comedy relief that you're hoping gets, crushed or eaten or something. But no, he's likable enough and he carries it. And it is interesting to see him come back to this character post his Oscar nomination. And it's like, oh yeah, this character's still, this same comedy relief character. But it's fine. And he and Dan Stevens have a lot of scenes together and have this sort of chemistry between them that works. But that's kind of the thing, is when I talked about it basically being like, it almost feels like an ensemble, where it's kind of like the two of them, it's Rebecca Hall and her daughter, and then we've got Kong over here, and Kong's having like this whole sort of silent arc with this sort of smaller ape that he takes in as like a child, and you'll notice that there's somebody that's missing a lot from from this ensemble. We had the whole opening where we get Godzilla and Kong, as the title promises. We get stuff like Godzilla sleeps in the Coliseum now, like it's his bed, which is a fun detail. He literally he'll go in there, he'll come out, he'll wreak some havoc, and then he'll just curl up back in there. And that's basically what most of his screen time is. So it doesn't feel like a Godzilla and Kong movie, it does feel like a Kong movie, which I'm not mad at, because like I said, I didn't have any expectations going in. I had no idea what this was supposed to be. But I mean, based on the title, sure, I was expecting a little more Godzilla and Kong, especially since they were so well distributed between the two of them in the previous movie. In Godzilla vs. Kong, they both kind of got, their time to shine. But here, it definitely feels like Godzilla was kind of an afterthought, and I don't think it would have... Well, I guess, if you took Godzilla's name out of the title, it wouldn't have made as much money as it has, so there is that. And like I said, for these movies, these movies that are doing pretty well financially, despite the fact that I feel like they keep sneaking up on them. So, there is that. They're like Godzilla himself. They're really big and they're massive, but they can just quietly, suddenly appear. And so... it's fine. Like I said, I think, especially since I just said that Kong Skull Island is my favorite movie in this franchise, I'm not mad that there's a lot of Kong, so that's fine. But as far as this jumping around and all this, it does feel like, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but for a movie, and for the movie that it is, it does feel kind of uneventful. If that makes sense. Because it's not, and I don't mean that to say that it's not a boring movie. It's not at all a boring movie. But like I said, for a movie that's like a big spectacle movie, there's surprisingly few event moments. Like, it's mostly the characters, like, kind of getting further into this and investigating further into this, and sort of observing Kong and occasionally observing Godzilla. And once again, I'm not mad at that either. I think I was more just... I had to kind of come to terms with the fact midway through the movie that this is what the movie was for a large portion of it. And, I mean, you could also make the argument that we're far enough into this franchise, and you have built it up as a spectacle enough that this is... You could see it as an upside to where it's like, oh, they're doing something a little unexpected, they're doing something a little more low-key than you would expect. But on the other side of that, it could feel like a lot of missed opportunities. Like, there's so many things we could be doing that it's just kind of it just kind of meanders for a while, for a large portion of the movie, like maybe an hour, maybe. And then pretty late into it, we're introduced to our main villain, who's very cool, Scar King, but he does, he in this whole sort of area, it does feel like we're getting another Planet of the Apes movie, like, in 2 or 3 weeks or something. And so that it feels very much like we kind of got a lost Planet of the Apes movie, like of this new era of Apes movies, and it has that vibe, kind of in the middle of this one, and Kong kind of just wandered into it. Um, it even kind of feels like the smaller ape that he sort of takes in as a child kind of feels like it'd be like a younger version of Steve Zahn's ape in War for the Planet of the Apes a little bit. But yeah, but we do, once this happens, then we kind of start hitting all of our big spectacle moments, and then it kind of becomes the movie that people were probably hoping for and waiting for. And it doesn't disappoint when we get there, and I think that's the important thing, and that's why, in retrospect, I can look back on the rest of the movie and go, I don't really dislike what they were doing, because the spectacle does come. They do deliver on what they promised. It just might feel like they could have done more while we were getting there. But overall, I think it does like pay for itself when we get there. So we get moments like that small child ape is used as a weapon at one point. Somebody gets Deep Blue Seed to death. There's cool moments like there's like the bones, and then there's like a spine bridge, stuff like that. Like I said, when we meet the villain and we see his whole thing and his really crazy design and how he's just sort of, just something makes your skin crawl just in his design alone. And then we get, the big climatic battle sequences. There's one time where the villain rides in on a Titan. It gives you everything, just kind of in like the last act. But I feel like that's forgivable enough with how much it delivers. Just the thing that was really throwing me off, I think, was the lack of Godzilla when you're not expecting a lack of Godzilla is a little. And you would think we would be, we'd be jaded by the 2014 movie enough to where it's like, oh, I felt this before. That's this lack of Godzilla feels very familiar, but. But I don't know. Like I said, I think we're far into where there's a lot you can forgive easily if you're invested in this franchise, but there's still things that'll kind of leave you wanting. But like I said, there's still those moments that comes when he like spits the tooth out, stuff like that, or these really sort of big memorable moments. But yeah, they take their time getting there, but it's sort of a mixed bag as far as appreciating the fact that it takes them that long to get there. So that's really about it. It's a pretty simple movie. It's so that's yeah, maybe the fact that I'm not like going crazy, like when, not to keep worshiping at the altar of Kong Skull Island here, but when I saw that movie in 2017 and I came back and I sat in this very place and I talked to this very camera about that movie, I could not stop. Like, I was so psyched out of my mind about everything I had just seen. Like, every minute of that movie just blew me away. And it's like, the fact that I know how I could feel about a movie like this, and I'm just saying, like, it's very simple, and it's fine, and it delivers what it promises, but I don't feel, like, really hyped and passionate about it, I guess, is something that kind of makes me wish there was more to this one. But that's the thing, is like it feels like an episode rather than like a movie. Like it feels like, for most of it, like it almost feels like it could have been a future. It could be like a future episode of Monarch is essentially what the movie feels like. So that's, yeah. So like it's fine with what it does, but yeah, the argument can be made that it could be more for sure. I really don't, like I said, I don't know, this franchise just keeps sneaking up on me, so I don't know what, if any, future plans there are for anything. I would assume, I know Monarch, like, came off like a mini-series, but now I'm hearing it's supposed to be like a series. I really don't know, that's kind of fuzzy to me also, so I don't know where this is going, but I'm kind of liking having a franchise that's this big, that I just kind of like, I might forget about for a minute, and then it'll just kind of come back and remind me that it exists with a brand new movie. So I'll just I'll just let it go, and if this franchise should come back to me, great. If not, then we'll go on to other things. So that's where that leaves us. So, speaking of franchises, let's go to Kung Fu Panda 4. Another one where it's like, oh, these are still happening? Okay. I did say, when we talked about Kung Fu Panda 3 back in, I want to say, January of 2016, I was not that hyped about it. I wasn't really that into it. And at the time, I kind of wasn't into the trilogy in general. Like, I really, really loved the first movie when it came out. The second one kind of went in one ear and out the other to me. And then when the third one came out, it was just like, I just kind of didn't care. In the time between January 2016 and now, I have gone back to all three of those movies at some point, and they resonated a little more, and they were better than I remembered. And so, going into this one, I was more open-minded when I went into this one than I was when I went into the third movie. So, with that in mind, there is a lot of stuff here that makes you wonder. You can see the ideas that are in this one, where it's like, the first three feel like a pretty clean trilogy. So it's like the Toy Story 4 of the group. So it's like what are you doing? Like, what could you have to say that justifies you being here? Fourth movie. And you could see where they had big ideas with this one, where it was going to be like this whole, now let's have one that brings everything back, brings everything full circle. It's like almost like they're trying to do the endgame version of the Kung Fu Panda franchise. But the trouble is that you can see a lot of the holes in this idea, where it's like they planned it before they thought about if they could pull it off. Like, if they'd be able to get, say, all the voice actors back. But it's like, let's bring back, all the other characters. Let's bring back the villains. Let's bring back Scott. Let's just bring everybody back, as well as all these new characters, like Aquafina's Fox character. Kia Kwan is an armadillo that's like a career criminal. There's a great character that Ronnie Chang voices, where it's like he's a pelican, but he's a fish inside, and you don't realize that until like halfway through knowing the character, that the voice you're hearing is actually a fish inside his mouth. That's pretty funny. And of course we have all our returning characters, the original characters, plus Cranston from the last movie. No Kate Hudson, which is funny because I think I remember saying how useless and pointless her character was in 3, and I guess she just doesn't exist. I don't even remember what her, like, if her character even went anywhere in 3. I've watched it fairly recently, and I don't remember anything about that character. So, so all the important characters seem to have been assembled here, because it opens with the return of Tai Lung, and yeah, there are, horrible flashbacks to the Rise of Skywalker, and it's like, really? How? And it's like, oh, and, all the other movies had, like, these, great villains. Like, there was, Tai Lung in the first one, there was Gary Oldman's Peacock in the second one, and then there was J.K. Simmons in the third one. And it's like, oh, it's Tai Lung again. Okay. But this turned out to be a roller coaster, because it was like, oh, Tai Lung's back. Okay. But then it's revealed that the actual villain is a chameleon played by Viola Davis, who can turn into anything and anybody, or any version of anybody. She can even be an evil Poe. And it's great, and her design is really cool, and it's great that she's, like, super threatening and powerful, but she's, like, tiny compared to everybody else. But because it's Viola Davis's voice behind it, it works. And the character has, that sense of power itself also. So it's like, oh, so that's what happened. It's not Tai Lung, it's the chameleon. That's cool. That's a good way to bring back the villains without actually bringing back the villains. But, once again, the other curve of the roller coaster comes in, and it's like, oh, so the chameleon is actually bringing the villains back from the realm or whatever it is for real. So the villains are coming back. despite the fact that despite the fact that the chameleon can turn into anything or anybody, which she does. I don't know. So we bring the villains. We don't bring the villains back, but we also bring the villains back. So there's that. So, and it's like, what? Okay. So I guess when you look at it with the existence of the realm, it was always possible villains could come back in this world, I guess. But it just feels very, it still feels very uninspired. But when you add the chameleon plot in, it's better than it could be as far as just randomly bringing villains back. So whatever. But talking about bringing in the other characters, you'll notice that I have only mentioned Ian McShane as far as, like, you know, actors that actually came back. So, or get lines. And this movie does something really bizarre by... And it's like I was saying, the ideas are fine, but you can see where they weren't prepared for this production. Because for some reason, the five have been written out. And so, and it's almost like they were trying to cover their ass with it by doing the whole thing about when the Marvel movies were, like, really popping, and everybody was like, whenever they'd have an individual movie, somebody would say, like, well, why didn't they just bring why wouldn't all the Avengers be here for this? So they started putting in lines in later movies that are like, oh, well, this person's off doing this, and this person's off doing this. That's why they're not always assembling. They try to pull that in it's a very well animated sequence where we see what all the five are doing separately, but I was thinking that the idea of the five was that their whole thing is that they all, like, their sort of power, on top of what their skills were individually, their main power was working together. Like, that was the thing. So this just reeks of, well, we couldn't get the voice actors. So, and we had to we're trying to do our big sort of finale here with all the characters coming back. We just couldn't get any of the people that play them, despite the fact that this is an animated movie, so I feel like there's plenty of ways around that. Or even, like, you know, a way to rearrange schedules or something. I can't tell. It does not feel like the intention of this movie was to write the five out. It just doesn't, especially with what the threat is. Like, if ever there was going to be a moment where the five would have to be assembled and team up with Poe and new characters and all come together like this big avenging force, it would be the plot that this movie sets up. So it feels like a lot of things are missing. And so that's, like I said, you can just kind of see the holes in the production itself to where it's like, you guys weren't ready to make this. I don't know why you jumped into it, but, alright. But, we do have, like I said, we do have, the new character that's Awkwafina, because you apparently can't have an animated movie without Awkwafina, so she's the one that's like, is she, you know, an ally? Is she a villain? Is she working for the villain? Is she gonna turn on Poe? Is she gonna help him at the end? It's one of those, and we also, and you know what's happening here, because we just happened to set up this new character that's gonna be his ally, while he's looking for somebody to take over his mantle. And as the Dragon Warrior or whatever, so I don't know, and he's gonna take, I guess, Master Oogway's spot? I don't know I don't know what Shifu's doing here either. He's just kinda hanging around, being Shifu, being annoyed by Poe. That feels pretty convoluted and sorta last minute, so I don't know. He wasn't in his position for very long, I guess. So all of that is bringing in this new character, and it's like, oh, who's going to take over his mantle? I wonder. I don't know. I wouldn't want to spoil anything or anything, so... but, so they do that, they do the cliche thing, like they have the fight, and he's trying to keep the sacred things from, you know, breaking and stuff like that. All this stuff we've seen before, which still has the animation and, like, the way the fight scenes happen and the action, there's still charm lingering here. And so it has that going for it. If there's one thing that I feel like this might do better, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but one thing that this might do a little better than the third movie is it does seem like they've been getting a bit more... Well, the first movie was the first movie. The second one did feel like it reached, heavier territory. We got into, like, Poe's backstory and just how dangerous Gary Oldman's Peacock was. By the time we got to the third movie, even though J.K. Simmons was, like, a formidable villain, it did feel like we were starting to get into the let's make these more child friendly sort of thing. Like, it almost kind of feels like the second movie almost went a little too dark, so like, let's make it, like, really kid friendly now. And so, like, the franticness of it, and, like, the short attention span, aspect to it, felt like it was really starting to come into play into the third movie. And you can see that here, too. I actually feel like this one might handle that handle that better than the third movie. The third movie felt a little bit more frantic and short attention span than this one does. And this one's really frantic, too. But I felt like the action scenes kind of held this one together just a little more for me. Like the tavern scene, scenes plural, were working for me pretty much. Whether it be the initial one with Poe and the Fox, or when Bryan Cranston and Ping come in and he's trying to be threatening, but he keeps hurting himself. And we get the age-old gag that, as cliche as it is, it's one that always gets me. When there is a big or intimidating character that looks big or intimidating, and then we learn that they have a high-pitched scream when they're in pain. That joke has worked on me since I was a very small child, and in my 30s it somehow still works on me. So it has that going for it. And speaking of, oh my god, I cannot remember Bryan Cranston's character's name. I want to say Lee or something. But he and Ping, who's still wonderfully voiced by James Hong. Ping and James Hong's performances have always been, like, my favorite aspect of these movies, pretty much. All the way from the first movie to now. Ping might be my favorite character. And I really love that they kind of get their own sort of section of this movie, where it's the two dads. Like, yeah, they're basically doing the whole thing where it's like, they're just kind of being worried dads. But there's, like, a chemistry between them, and just the concept in general is really nice, and, like, wholesome between them. So I like that they kind of got their own portion of the movie, which may be, some of the best aspects of it. But, yeah, it's... there's also little comedic beats here and there that work, regardless of all the franticness. Like, the moment when he first gets to, like, a big city and no one knows who the Dragon Warrior is, so he says something like, are my adventures really that regional? And stuff like that. And, like, just little moments like that, are funny in their way. But, like I said, for as big as this seems to be trying to go, and trying to be this big finale that brings everything together from the other movies, you can just see all of the sort of missing parts to it, and it's like, it feels like we should be, like, it doesn't really feel like we're building to something grand through most of the movie. Only in, like, the climax do we get, oh man, here's all this stuff coming back. Even though the 5 are regulated to the end credits. It's, like I said, I can appreciate the ideas here, but it feels very much like they sort of bit off more than they can chew as far as ideas. That, or it also, I don't even know if you can do this with an animated movie, but it almost feels like sometimes they were winging it. With, like, there's just so much that goes into the production of an animated movie, and there's, like, different layers to the production of an animated movie. I don't even know how something comes off like it felt like it was really supposed to be something it ended up not quite being. I'm not quite sure how that happens with an animated movie, but yeah, there's so much that goes into making them. I don't know, but it feels like there's a number of reasons the 5 could be written out, and none of them add up. And it's, yeah. So, but it's still fun. Like I said, it's still got charm and, an effective humor to it. The way the fight scenes are animated and fluid still works, and bringing in the comedy aspect to the action while having a little layer of something meaningful, I guess you could say. That doesn't ring true as much as it has in the past, obviously, but everything else is more or less okay, but yeah, there's just a lot of missing parts. So We'll end that there, and we'll go on to Imaginary, which is where we'll land. Um, I was kind of keeping an open mind for this because I love horror so much, and we're getting so much horror this year. It feels like there's a new horror movie every week since this year started. And we've had, peaks, and we've had valleys, and we've had in between. This one, it was like, okay, there's something to this concept. Of course, it's going to be doing the twin movie thing with If. But still, it's like, it was like, okay, I'm sure you could do something with this. And, it's Blumhouse, which are very... They could go either way. We'll just kind of see what happens. Yeah, I was giving this benefit of the doubt when I went into it. But shit, guys, I kind of wish it was... I wish I had known it was a comedy when I went into it. That would have probably helped a lot. But, it probably wishes it was a comedy by the time the final product came to be. So, I mean, to admit, it does kind of have a somewhat startling nightmare sequence as its opening scene. And then the movie begins, and we meet the characters, and it does the horror movie thing. It's, they're kind of a new family because our main character's the stepmom, and he's the dad that already had the kids, and everybody's resentful. Like the little girl's kind of going through it because she's a little girl, and the mom has mental health issues, and there's a new mom here now. They've got the perpetually pissy teenage daughter, and with the very inconsistent personality, we learn, which I guess is the point because teenagers are moody or whatever. And we set up quite a bit about this whole imaginary friend world, where there's a bear that may or may not exist, that has a voice that may or may not be this little girl's voice, and it does generic horror movie shit. It has fake outs, it has wandering through the dark, it has endlessly calling out people's names. There's an actual moment where they do a jump scare, and there's an actual visible jump cut, and it looks really lame. So, and that's what's going on here. And what really sucks about that part in particular, and this was something kind of continuous throughout the movie, is when something really lame like that happens, usually a moment that was almost effective just happened. Where there was a moment where it was like, right before that jump scare, it was like, oh, that's that's kind of eerie. Oh, where's this going? And then that piece of shit happens. So that feels like it happens here a lot, where this movie is always almost finding an effective moment, and then searches immediately for the biggest way to fuck it up as soon as possible. And that's what happens for an hour and 45 minutes. You would think going into this was like, oh, this might be like a swift 80-something minute movie or something. But it's like, no, they tacked on about 20 extra minutes to this thing somehow. Mainly, I think, at the beginning and the end. The dad character, he's one of those characters where it's like the writers had nothing to do with him. So it's like, we'll just have him leave. We'll have him go on a business trip before any shit goes down. Even though we're going to spend like the first 20 minutes introducing them as a full family. And it's like that's the whole point, is it's like they're kind of this whole family. But then it's like, oh no, let's make it a new stepmom trying to bond with the daughters through trauma sort of thing. We don't need the dad, but we've already written him in. Should we cut him out? No. The movie's just going to be 20 extra minutes, I guess. Because you could cut the dad out, and it would be like, this hour 45-minute movie would be about an hour and a half, probably. And it could work. But, well, not work, but be shorter, be a little more, concise about itself, but, yeah. And another thing that's kind of frustrating is not just the fact that it keeps cutting itself off when it almost does something good, but it's something that when you see the sort of tension scenes, tension in quotes, it does feel like it seems like it was probably more surreal and more suspenseful on paper, like in script form. It probably read better than it actually looks. Especially since we're basically got Blumhouse using like leftover effects from Night Swim. It feels like, and the quality of those. I haven't even reviewed Night Swim yet. That will come, but I'm doing things all out of order here. But yeah, this is Night Swim's starting to look a little better after Imaginary, if that tells you anything. So, looking at this, there's a lot of stuff, especially, there's a lot of laughable dialogue that keeps contradicting itself. Like, this might be, this little girl is actually a pretty decent actress in this role. Like, she's very convincing in these moments where she has to be, like, super scared and super hurt and confused and all that stuff, having these big emotions. It all feels convincing. But the character herself, might be much more of an idiot than a child of this age. Well, she's a very young child, but when I say that, I'm thinking about a scene when one of the concepts is the imaginary friend makes her write a list, and it says, like, do something that makes you happy, now do something that's going to get you in trouble, now do something that's, you're going to hurt yourself. And so, the do something that hurts thing, she goes outside, she gets a piece of wood off the fence with a nail sticking out of it, and she's getting ready to impale her hand on it. And she says, "You promise it won't hurt?" This is a very small child, yes. But I feel like even a child this age would, number one, know that there's no way you're going to impale your hand on a nail without it hurting. And secondly, understand that the whole checkbox on this list is do something that hurts. What? I don't know. That's just one example. But going into it, as far as the characters, because this is one of those movies that's really trying to do the, trauma translates as horror in a horror movie kind of thing. It's trying to do some real A24 shit. It's hilarious. The movie's very funny. The movie itself, its intentions, they're all hilarious. But, yeah, so they're doing the traumatic backstory thing, and so there's multiple scenes of the main character talking quietly about her trauma with her dad as sad piano music plays. And it's like, oh, this is the part where we've talked about this in previous reviews, where it's like, it doesn't feel naturally like, oh, I'm getting to know this character. Oh, there's stakes now because I care about this character, and the character's backstory makes her character make so much sense, and it's going to tie into however this is going to climax and all that. And it's like, it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like the writer's going, we learned in film school that this is how scripts are written. You're supposed to, this is the part in the structure where it's like, main character gives backstory, trauma, ties in. It's like they wrote bullet points in the script, rather than writing a character. And it's like, it just feels like this is the part where this happens. There's no fucking feeling behind it at all. So, and then, of course, it hits every other beat after that. We have the expert that comes in, the doctor. We have the previous case that was like this one. And it's like, oh, since this happened, this will happen to us now. There is a moment here, there is a line here that is absolutely hysterical, and I don't know if I can do it justice. You have to see the actress's delivery. But you know how I was just talking about there's moments where the movie almost does something good and then fucks it up? This might be, regardless of any comedy that comes out the rest of this year, this might be the funniest moment of the year. This moment that could be genuinely effective is there's the girl and she's got the bear, and when the bear talks, it's obviously the girl's voice. And so the girl's talking, and this doctor's there watching, and she's saying, she's talking to the bear, then the bear's talking back in that voice. And then the girl turns around, and her mouth isn't moving, and you can still hear the bear's voice. And the doctor witnesses this. And it's like, this is the moment. This is the turning point. This is when shit gets real. This is when the expert is starting to know what's going down, and everything is gonna go off. So, now you might also think, in real life, a character may not believe something supernatural is happening. But I mean, this very small child turned around, is not moving her mouth at all, and this demonic bear voice is still talking. So, dead serious, completely straight-faced, terror, everything. This doctor goes to the stepmom and says, has she been taking up any hobbies? Has she taken up ventriloquism? Just dead fucking serious ass. Has she taken up ventriloquism? It's not played for comedy at all. That is her very first instinct. Is to ask. She's just doing ventriloquism, right? And that kind of sets the tone for the rest of what we're doing here. Because you can also tell that's not meant to be funny, because you can see in moments later where it is trying to be funny. And weirdly enough, the movie does not try to throw in funny, in quotes, lines until we're in the third act, until we're going towards the climax. Then suddenly we get moments like, we need to hurt from within, and the teenage daughter quips in, should I send a bitchy text? And here's the thing, is not only is that the attempt at a comedic line, the score, the underlying score that's playing, stops when she says that. She says, oh, should I send a bitchy text? And the movie literally pauses for a laugh break like it's a fucking sitcom. It's like, it feels like parody after a while. The ventriloquism line completely feels like it's out of a Wayans Brothers movie or something. But it's, yeah. And like I said, we get all up in this area where we're hitting cliches left and right. Everybody, like, the little girl disappears, so they're just wandering around calling her name for a while. And then another golden piece of dialogue graces this movie. It's, the more it goes, the more it just, like I said, it almost, if this were a better movie, you would think it was embracing this. But it's playing itself completely seriously. Because we have Betty Buckley playing the sort of... Basically, she's the second... They double down on the expert cliche character in these horror movies. But, so the sister's walking around the neighborhood yelling out the girl's name, and Betty Buckley just appears, and she says, I know your sister's missing, but this is about what happened to your stepmom when she was a kid. And then she gives, like, a whole other backstory all over again, and it's like... She literally materialized out of thin air to tell not just this teenage daughter, but us, the audience, what this movie is. Where it's like, I hate to interrupt this portion where we're just, you know, screaming the girl's name, but what this is actually about is the stepmom and what happened to her as a kid. And it's like, the dialogue is so... Like, I mean, you say exposition. Sure, you can just call it exposition, but I mean, it precisely... The movie pauses to have Betty Buckley almost break the fourth wall and tell you, okay, I know we're doing this whole thing with the sister right now, but we're going to stop the movie right now so that I can tell you this is the direction we're going. And it's like, well, we already know this because all the stepmom does is talk about her fucking backstory. We know. We know that's where this movie's going. We know pretty much what the backstory is. We don't see... They really go into the whole her dad stuff. And there's a lot of... Characters are lunging and grabbing all the time. And it's... yeah, that's... It's, like... I know... I've been pretty easy on movies for a little while now. Like, over the past couple of years. Like, people say, oh, movies are so bad. Like, people are trying to make every, you know, like, Argyle or Madam Web or whatever, like, every movie that comes out that's, like, some variation of not good or kind of bad, everybody wants to turn into the next The Room. And it's so exhausting, and there's just no... And, like, hardly any movie actually warrants that at the end of the day. People are trying way too hard to make bad movies into, like, meme bad movies. And so the fact that movies, like, the fact that Madam Web has the reputation it did, and the fact that people are still, you know, ripping Argyle apart, and this movie seemed to kind of slip through the cracks when this is the kind of movie that should be getting that treatment. because it's that baffling. Like, it's like, you think about all the things it takes to get a movie made, all of the steps a movie has to go through to reach a theater screen, all the I's it has to go through, all the yeses that have to be said for a movie to end up in theater screens. And a movie like this somehow manages to get through all of that and end up being seen with these moments in it. I don't know how a movie like this happens. And then we just end up, and it's stuff like, it's all the stuff, they're just grabbing from other things now. They go into the imaginary friend version of the Further, that's what the climax is. There's a moment where a fire is set off it's the scene from Child's Play when Andy lights the fireplace with Chucky in there. There's a very similar line. And I don't call that homage. I call it, there's no reason for this movie to exist, that's what I call it. And that's not enough. I was talking about if you cut the dad out of the movie, you'd have plenty of time to cut out. Like, you could have like an 80-something minute movie that feels much more tight and concise. Well, not only that, but this is also one of those movies that has two endings. Because it hates its fucking audience. It wants to hold you hostage. Like, it wants to show you how bad it can possibly be, and then make you think it's over, and it's not. It's like The Room in 1408, when John Cusack thought he was out for like 20 minutes, and he like went outside, and he, you know, went to the beach, went to the post office, started living his life again. It's like, oh fuck, you're still in the room, and there's still 20 minutes of the movie left. Which was wild. No. Completely far away from how that felt. This just feels like the movie hates you and never wants you to leave. And wants you to feel the pain of this movie forever. And not only does it have the fucking gall to have two endings, they still have the fucking gall to end on one of those stupid cliche cliffhangers. So it just doesn't let up. And it feels like it's really, like, it really feels like it's trying to embrace something. Like, Betty Buckley's character gets all insane while they're in the imaginary Further, whatever you want to call it. And you can tell the director was probably really pleased with his product behind the camera. He's like, yes, I'm having this, you know, veteran actress, and she's going crazy. This is amazing. Everybody's embarrassing themselves. Except maybe the little child actress playing the younger sister. She's the only one I feel like that pretty much comes out unscathed. So good for her. That's not easy for a child actor to do, especially in a movie like this. But she's trying to pull it together. Bless her. But this is a fucking disaster. I feel like I haven't seen a disaster like this in a bit. But we do still have, you know, reviews coming for those other two movies that I mentioned. But I mean, like I said, this is what people should... this should be, like, the meme bad movie. And it's crazy to me that I feel like this movie basically came and went, and I didn't really hear anything. So, which is what I feel like a lot of those other movies should have been more like. Like, Argyle could have just came and went, and then people just already forgot it existed by now. People are still hating on it, though. This one, on the other hand, somehow I hadn't heard anything. And so it's like, do people know, like, did people see this? I don't even, I know it was out there. I know it was in theaters. I don't know how well or not well it did. But did people forget how fucking stupid this is? How embarrassing this is? How comedic this is? I don't know, but, that's... I feel quite sorry for a lot of people involved, so that's how that is. So that's going to be these three. The next three are going to be one or two movies that I've mentioned before. One of the movies I actually mentioned in this video at the beginning is going to be on the next video, and then we're going to keep going until we're basically caught up. Like I said, kind of doing mixing and matching of movies that are coming out more recently and the ones that came out earlier this year. All of that until we're caught up. So until the next thing, I think that's it.